We begin with a remarkably blunt assessment of the war in Iraq from one of the men who waged it. Retired three-star General Ricardo Sanchez commanded the war effort in Iraq from June of 2003 to June of 2004. A lot happened on his watch, and he took a lot of heat for it. The insurgency began. Abu Ghraib became a global scandal. His leadership was questioned. Today, he spoke out, as Vice President Cheney might say, big time. He said, and I quote, "The administration, Congress, especially the Department of State, must shoulder the responsibility for this catastrophic failure." He called the war plan catastrophically flawed and unrealistically optimistic. He slammed the country's, quote, incompetent strategic leadership. In short, he called the war, quote, a nightmare with no end in sight. And that's not all he said, as cameras for NBC News were rolling.
Who will demand accountability for the failure of our national political leadership involved in the management of this war? They have unquestionably been derelict in the performance of their duty. In my profession, these types of leaders would immediately be relieved or court-martialed. The best we can do with this flawed approach is stave off defeat.
No immediate reaction from the White House, but a spokeswoman for the National Security Council did issue the following non-statement. "We appreciate his service to the country. As General Petraeus and Ambassador Crocker said, there's more work to be done, but progress is being made in Iraq, and that's what we're focused on now." That's their statement. Coming from a longtime critic of the war, these statements would not be news. Coming from the man who oversaw the war, they are simply stunning. CNN's Nick Robertson is in Baghdad with us tonight, and in Washington on the military political angle, CNN's Jamie McIntyre. Jamie, has this ever occurred in recent military history that a retired general of this stature calls his former political bosses, the leaders of this country, derelict in their duty? I mean, he said if they were military, they would have been court-martialed.
Well, it is quite stunning for him, but don't forget, it's not just an indictment of the war, but also Rick Sanchez is protecting his own reputation here. He's faulted for a lot of what happened, as you said, after he took over. The insurgency started. He took over like a month after victory was declared in Iraq, or mission accomplished was declared. And he oversaw that area where it became stunningly obvious that things were going to be a lot more difficult. So in some sense, he's also talking about his own reputation.
There's also reports that he's, trying to write a book. Does that play a role in this? I mean, does he have a book? Is this some sort of promotional campaign?
Well, anytime we hear these generals briefing, when they're briefing at the Pentagon or we're talking to them in the field, we're always wondering how free they are to tell us what they really think. If they think, for instance, that they're overseeing a disaster, they're just not free to say that. So it's always very interesting to hear what they say after the fact. I mean, just witness, for instance, General Clark's book after Kosovo about what really went on there. So we're always wondering about that. So that's not all that unusual. But, one has to wonder why he didn't say anything before this. And, he sat in a three-star position in Europe, essentially waiting to serve enough time in that grade to retire at this three-star rank, knowing he couldn't be confirmed for a fourth star, and really didn't say anything while he was still in uniform.
I want to ask you more about that. Nick, General Sanchez said Iraq is a nightmare with no end in sight. He described the surge as a desperate move that won't achieve long-term stability. Has General Petraeus responded to this?
Not that we've heard here so far, Anderson. It's come out really very late at night, and there's been no response from the military that we've heard. I must say, from being out in the field talking to senior and mid-level commanders over the past few years, lieutenant colonels, majors, colonels, people of that rank, they privately, and this is very privately and only some of them in unguarded moments, will say, we really feel that we've been essentially dumped on by the politicians, given an impossible task to achieve. Anderson?
Jamie, talking about what he said and didn't say when he was a commander, why didn't he either speak out or resign if he felt this way? I mean, I've gone through a couple of old interviews with him, and, when he was asked right after he left command but was still in the military about were there enough troops, he said, that's something that's going to be debated for decades, and I'm not sure having more forces that we really could have done anything with more forces that we had. I mean, just about everyone now seems to admit that even back then they all knew they needed more forces.
Well, at the risk of incurring General Sanchez's wrath, because about half of what he said today in this forum, which was a gathering of military editors and reporters, was basically blasting the news media for lack of nuance, lack of context, not giving people a fair shake, himself included. So the risk of that, I would just tell you that he's in a situation where you know, he has a limit to what he can say when he's in uniform, but if he really does feel that there was a catastrophic failure, it's really incumbent on senior military officers to take that step, to speak out and step down. You lose a lot of the credibility if you wait until years afterwards to speak up and say, hey, in retrospect, I think we made a big mistake.
Nick, I mean, maybe I'm overreacting, but I just find it remarkable that he said that the leaders have been derelict in their duty and, you know, in other circumstances would have been court-martialed. I mean, that's an extraordinary statement for the guy who was running the war.
It is an extraordinary statement. It is something that's sort of likely to undermine the confidence of soldiers here, some of them who really feel that this is a very difficult situation they're in, that they do wonder about the greater political achievements, again, talking about the regular soldiers, and that essentially they're fighting for their own survival and that of the troops either side of them. Anderson?
And Nick, also, this at the same time comes at I mean, where are casualty levels at this point? I had read a report recently, and they're actually down, civilian and military.
They are. They've been down for the past few months, and these comments do come at a time when it seems as if there is some positive light in Iraq. Look at Al-Anbar province in the west of the country. Tribal militias working with U.S. troops. This is new. This has brought stability. It's a model that's being applied north and south of Baghdad, the south of the country. The British in Basra have done a deal with the militias there. Violence has gone down in the south of the country. The death tolls are down. So there are figures that point to successes, but talk to some Iraqis here and you say, hey, Baghdad's safer. And they say, is it really? Last year I could cross the city. Now I can't. It's safer because I don't leave my house and don't move around the city. There's a sense here that problems are being stored up for the future, that this sort of civil war, a clash of the Sunnis and Shias could still happen, that positions are being entrenched and embedded and built upon, Anderson.
Nick Robertson, Jamie McIntyre. Jamie, did you have something to say?
Just one quick point to add. General Sanchez does say that he believes that he concedes that there's progress, but he says it's going to be a wasted effort, just like the past wasted effort. But at the same time, he also says the U.S. can't leave Iraq. He says that would be a disaster. And what he's calling for in these remarks he gave today was for the entire nation to have a consensus on a strategy for success, and he says that just hasn't happened.
He also says that the government has not done a good job of mobilizing the rest of the government, not just the military. They've relied solely on the military to really fight the war. They really haven't utilized the rest of the government, talking about the State Department and other aspects. No doubt we're going to be talking about this a lot in the days to come. Jamie McIntyre, Nick Robertson, appreciate it.